The Xylosian sun, a pale orange disk in the sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the meticulously maintained gardens of the research colony. Dr. Evelyn Evie Reed, a whirlwind of auburn hair and barely contained energy, surveyed her surroundings with a sigh that was more of a gentle gust of exasperation. The carefully planted earth flora looked almost too perfect against the backdrop of the alien landscape, like a carefully placed postcard from home that couldn't quite capture the raw, untamed beauty of Xylos itself. She adjusted the strap of her well-worn satchel, its contents a chaotic mix of notebooks, linguistic analysis tools, and a half-eaten protein bar that had seen better days. Seriously, this place is like a botanical museum, Evie muttered to herself, kicking a stray pebble that dared to interrupt the symmetry of the garden path. Where's the chaos? The mess? The fun? She was, to put it mildly, bored. After months of analyzing the relatively straightforward, and frankly, a little dull, communication patterns of the Glabian delegation, Evie was starting to feel like her brain was turning into one of those perfectly manicured, lifeless hedges she was currently critiquing. The interspecies relations had been, well, too smooth. Everyone was polite, diplomatic, and about as exciting as a tax audit. Her whole life had been spent dreaming of the messy, wonderful, unpredictable reality of first contact, and instead, she was stuck in a planetary suburbia of pleasantries. Today, however, held a glimmer of potential chaos. A Xylosian scholar, Kale Zar, was due to arrive, a representative of a species known for their complex communication methods. They were, Evie had read in her briefing, fond of elaborate gestures, intricate bioluminescence, and a peculiar vocal range that spanned several octaves. In other words, potentially messy. Evie checked her chronometer, 5 minutes past the designated landing time. Of course. She walked with purpose towards the designated landing pad, her boots crunching softly on the gravel path. Her lab coat flapped around her like a flag of nerdy defiance, a stark white contrast to her vibrant, multicolored shirt underneath. She reached the pad just as a sleek, silver shuttle touched down with a gentle hiss of escaping air. The ramp extended, and a figure emerged, or rather, unfurled. Kael'zar was striking. He was large, easily a head taller than Evie, with iridescent skin that shimmered with a soft, internal light. 3 large, expressive eyes surveyed the scene with an air of detached curiosity, while 6 long, flexible tentacles flowed behind him, gracefully articulating a language all their own. He carried himself with a fluid, almost aquatic elegance. Evie found herself momentarily stunned. It was one thing to read about the Xylosians, it was quite another to see one in person, breathing, shimmering, and very much alien. Dr. Reed, a synthesized voice echoed from a translator worn by Kael'zar. I am Kael'zar. It is a pleasure to meet you. The voice was surprisingly melodious, and Evie snapped out of her trance. Yes, Kael'zar, it's wonderful to meet you too, she replied, offering a tentative smile. Welcome to Xylos colony. I'm Evie. I'll be your, well, I guess you could call me your guide and translator while you're here. Kael'zar tilted his head, his bioluminescence flaring slightly. Guide and translator? I had understood you were a researcher, primarily interested in linguistic analysis? Evie chuckled. That's the professional version. Guide is the polite term for someone who's going to try and stop you from accidentally setting off the colony security systems with your tentacles. No offense. One of Kael'zar's tentacles twitched slightly. Security systems? Are your physical laws so precarious that they are threatened by my mere presence? More like we like our buildings in one piece, thanks, Evie said with a grin. We humans, we're very fond of structural integrity. Now, how about we go back to the lab? I've got some tea brewing, that might help with the adjustment to our atmosphere. Tea? Kael'zar's translator voice conveyed a tone that could only be described as inquisitive curiosity. An Earth custom? The most quintessential Earth custom, Evie agreed, leading the way. It's a hot beverage. Plant-based, usually, but sometimes we add milk. Don't ask. The point is, it's a ritual. We humans are obsessed with rituals. Kael'Zar followed, his tentacles moving with a gentle grace that belied their strength. As they walked, he observed his surroundings with meticulous detail, his bioluminescence shifting in subtle patterns that Evie couldn't quite decipher. The air grew thick with an undercurrent of something strange, something that prickled at her senses in a way that was both intriguing and disconcerting. When they reached her lab, Evie gestured towards a cluttered table laden with mugs, tea bags, and an array of brewing paraphernalia. Right, so, we have Earl Grey, green tea, herbal infusions. What's your preference? I'm sure we can find something that won't offend your Xylosian palate. Kael'Zar extended a tentacle towards a mug of steaming Earl Grey, his iridescent skin shimmering. May I observe the procedure? He asked, his translator voice laced with genuine interest. Of course. Evie beamed, feeling a surge of her old enthusiasm. She carefully explained the process of steeping the tea, the importance of proper brewing time, and the delicate art of adding milk, which she herself often skipped. Kael'Zar observed every step, his 3 eyes fixed on the teacup with an almost unnerving intensity. When the tea was ready, Evie offered Kael'Zar a mug. He took it with a delicate grip of one of his tentacles, the others moving to hold it steadily. The fragrance is complex, he noted. Evie watched as he carefully brought the mug closer. She hadn't considered how alien the very act of drinking might seem to the Xylosians. As he tilted the mug, a few drops of tea spilled, and one of Kael'Zar's tentacles moved with lightning speed to catch it. He flicked it towards his mouth-like opening, with surprisingly fluid dexterity. Fascinating, he declared, his bioluminescence flaring briefly. The sensation is unusual. I detect traces of bergamot. Yep, that's the Earl Grey, Evie said with a grin, taking a sip of her own tea. So, what do you think? Does it meet Xylosian standards of beverage excellence? Kael'Zar paused, his bioluminescence flickering with a complex pattern that made Evie's eyes swim. It is stimulating, he finally said. There appears to be a chemical reaction occurring with your biological composition. Your pheromones are heightened. I am observing increased agitation within your autonomic nervous system. You are quite interesting, Dr. Reed. Evie blinked, setting her mug down with a clatter. She'd been so busy with the tea ritual that she hadn't noticed the shift in his bioluminescence. Was he saying she was nervous? Or something else? She suppressed a sudden urge to fidget with her shirt collar. Right, she stammered. Well, the caffeine can be quite potent. That would explain the agitation. We can always switch to chamomile if that would be better. Kael'Zar, however, didn't seem to be done with his observations. He tilted his head again, his bioluminescence pulsing faster now, and reached out with one of his tentacles, extending it towards Evie. May I? He inquired. Evie stared at the approaching tentacle, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. The moment where communication broke down. The moment where alien biology met human awkwardness. She could feel the flush rise on her cheeks. May you, what? She managed to squeak, suddenly feeling very aware of her own pheromones, and how they might be reacting to whatever was happening right now. The tentacle reached her, just a few centimeters from her arm. Evie held her breath, bracing herself for contact. She imagined various scenarios, him trying to feel the texture of her skin, or perhaps wanting to analyze her clothing material. Instead, Kael'Zar's tentacle continued its arc, ending, with a gentle tap, on her mostly empty teacup. May I have another serving? Kael'Zar clarified, his translator voice perfectly neutral. Evie stared at the tentacle, then the teacup, then back at Kael'Zar, her mouth agape. Relief and a strange form of confused disappointment washed over her in equal measure. Oh, she mumbled, picking up the cup with shaky hands, right. Of course. Another cup coming right up. As she busied herself with refilling the tea, Evie tried to ignore the way her heart was still pounding, the way her skin still tingled where the tentacle had been, the way Kael'Zar was observing her with an unnerving and strangely magnetic intensity. This was going to be far more interesting than she'd ever expected, she thought, glancing at Kael'Zar, who was now calmly observing the steam rising from his tea with all three of his luminous eyes. The first tentative touch of the alien tango had begun. And it was already clear that she was going to be tripping over her own feet on every step. The next morning found Evie in a state of what she liked to call controlled chaos. Her lab, already a testament to her disorganized approach to research, now felt like a battlefield after a particularly messy skirmish. Notebooks lay scattered across the table like fallen soldiers, linguistic analysis software flashed erratically on her monitor, and the faint aroma of yesterday's Earl Grey still lingered in the air, now mingled with a hint of something else. Something vaguely metallic and oddly compelling. She'd spent most of the night trying to decipher the meaning behind Kael'Zar's bioluminescent patterns. She'd even made a chart, meticulously noting the shifts and pulses she'd observed during their brief tea ceremony. The results, unfortunately, looked more like a Jackson Pollock painting than a logical scientific analysis. "Okay, Evie, time to put on your big girl science pants and figure this out," she muttered to herself, grabbing a handful of protein-rich dried fruit, another staple of her haphazard diet. She crunched down on a piece with a force that suggested she was attempting to subdue it into submission. Alien body language, that's all it is. Just another puzzle to solve. The colony, meanwhile, was abuzz with the news of Kael'Zar's arrival. Some of the research staff, primarily those from the biological and astrophysics departments, were practically vibrating with excitement. Others, mainly those from the engineering and administrative sectors, viewed the Xylossian scholar with a cautious curiosity that bordered on suspicion. The human condition, Evie mused, was nothing if not predictable in its capacity for both fascination and fear. Kael'Zar had been housed in a specialized containment unit, meticulously designed to maintain his specific environmental requirements. It was essentially a large, climate-controlled terrarium with a built-in misting system and a complex network of pipes to regulate temperature and humidity. Evie felt a pang of something akin to sympathy whenever she looked at it. It was as if he were an exotic, fascinating creature on display at a zoo. Of course, the Xylossians were probably thinking the same about the humans, with their fragile bodies and constant need for solid ground. She found Kael'Zar in the main observation room, calmly studying a holographic display of the colony's layout. He was standing in the center of his containment unit, his bioluminescence pulsing softly as he interacted with the interface. The morning light filtering through the transparent walls created a dazzling display of iridescent patterns across his skin. Evie found herself momentarily captivated, a little like looking at a living, breathing aurora borealis. "Morning, Kael'Zar," she said, approaching the transparent wall. "How are you finding our little fishbowl?" He turned his gaze towards her, his three eyes fixing on her with their characteristic intensity. "The environment is satisfactory," he said through his translator. "Though I find the lack of ambient water to be somewhat limiting. Your atmospheric conditions are dry." "Yeah, we humans do like our deserts," Evie chuckled, leaning against the wall. "Less messy, you know. Though I guess mess is relative, considering you guys live in a giant underwater disco." One of Kael'Zar's tentacles twitched. "Disco? Oh, right, you wouldn't know about that," Evie said, mentally slapping herself. "It's an Earth thing. Never mind. Anyway, I was thinking we could do some more cultural exchange today. I have a lecture planned on human social customs, specifically, personal space." She emphasized the last two words with a wry grin. Kael'Zar tilted his head. "Personal space? You delineate territories within such close physical proximity?" "Well, yeah, kinda," Evie said, shifting uncomfortably. "It's like, you know, an invisible bubble. You're supposed to keep it a reasonable distance away from each other. Otherwise, it gets awkward." Kael'Zar seemed to consider this for a moment, his bioluminescence flickering with a pattern that seemed almost analytical. "So, you define these areas as a barrier to physical contact. It seems illogical. It's also completely arbitrary and socially constructed," Evie added, more to herself than to him. "But that doesn't stop us from having a panic attack if someone gets too close to our personal space bubbles. Especially if they're a six-tentacled, bioluminescent alien." "Panic attack?" Kael'Zar seemed intrigued. Is this a common occurrence? With some people, yes, with others, no. We're a complicated species, Evie said, waving a hand dismissively. So, shall we try not to pop each other's personal space bubbles today? For science, of course. Kael'Zar extended a tentacle towards her, his bioluminescence intensifying. I will make an effort, he said. Evie took a step back, more out of reflex than anything else. Right, excellent, she said, trying to maintain a sense of calm. So, first we're going to the lab, and then we'll go to the hydroponics bay. I thought you might like to see our attempts to grow your local flora. The lab visit started off promisingly, with Kael'Zar showing a keen interest in Evie's research methods and asking insightful questions. He was, without a doubt, brilliant. His understanding of linguistics and cultural nuances was far beyond what she'd expected. She showed him her charts and her failed attempts at understanding his bioluminescence. Fascinating, he said, his tentacles delicately handling her notes. Your attempt to understand the complex interplay of light and pheromonal signaling is commendable. Though your methods are, shall we say, rudimentary. Evie chuckled. Hey, we're not all bioluminescent geniuses, she said, trying to hide her own slight embarrassment. But we're trying, and hey, I've only been studying it for one day. The problem began when Kael'Zar's pheromonal output started to increase. At first, it was just a subtle undercurrent, a faint metallic scent that tickled the back of Evie's nose. But as the morning progressed, it intensified, creating a strange, almost hypnotic effect. Evie found it difficult to concentrate, her thoughts becoming hazy, her cheeks getting flushed, and a strange sense of anticipation brewing in the pit of her stomach. She tried to keep her composure, explaining complex grammatical structures and carefully pointing out differences in Xylosian cultural patterns, but with every shift in Kael'Zar's bioluminescence, her carefully constructed facade of professional detachment began to crumble. It was like her brain was trying to decipher complex equations while her body was inexplicably drawn to the most enticing dessert in the entire galaxy. Things reached a head when she was demonstrating a new piece of linguistic analysis software. Kael'Zar, fascinated, leaned closer, his tentacles reaching to touch the holographic interface. His bioluminescence flared, causing the software to malfunction and display a series of nonsensical characters on the screen. Oh, for crying out loud! Evie exclaimed, her voice rising in frustration. Not again. Seriously, is your glow-in-the-dark act going to fry every piece of tech I own? Kael'Zar pulled back, his bioluminescence dimming slightly. My apologies, Dr. Reed. I was merely observing the intricate patterns of the electromagnetic fields. Well, try not to observe them too closely, if you can, Evie muttered, frantically rebooting the system. This is why we have surge protectors. Just as the software came back online, she felt something brush against her arm. She looked down to find one of Kael'Zar's tentacles, the iridescent surface still faintly pulsing, had come into contact with her bare skin. A jolt of electricity, warm and tingly, shot through her, making her gasp. Oh my God, again, with the tentacles, Kael'Zar! Evie exclaimed, her face burning bright red. She pulled her arm back, her pulse quickening to a frantic beat. Kael'Zar tilted his head. Is the contact unpleasant? No. Yes. I don't know. Evie said, scrambling for an explanation. It's unexpected. And it's messing with my data. Also, we're trying to adhere to these personal space rules, remember? He remained silent for a moment, observing her with an intensity that made her squirm. I am detecting a strong pheromonal reaction from your body, he said finally. Is this another Earth social construct? Evie closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. This was getting more and more surreal by the minute. It's complicated, she managed, her voice strained. It's an involuntary physiological response. It doesn't mean anything. It's just biology, you know. Biology, Kael'Zar echoed, his bioluminescence flickering with a new pattern, one that Evie didn't recognize. I find the biological variations within the human species particularly fascinating. He paused, then added, in a tone that was almost suggestive, perhaps a more hands-on examination is in order? Evie's eyes widened, and her mouth dropped open. Had he just flirted? With a tentacle touch? She could feel the blood rushing to her face, and it wasn't just the lingering effects of his pheromones. I think, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, that we should probably go to the hydroponics bay. Right now. She grabbed her satchel and practically fled the lab, leaving Kael'Zar standing amidst the chaos of her research, a faint, luminous smile playing across his features. The hydroponics bay, with its orderly rows of plants, felt like a safe haven compared to the chaos that was rapidly engulfing her lab and her very being. The alien tango had just taken a wild, unpredictable twirl, and Evie was starting to suspect that this dance might be more than she bargained for. The hydroponics bay was supposed to be a sanctuary. A place of calm, where carefully cultivated earth and xylosian plants thrived under the soft glow of artificial suns. Evie, however, felt anything but calm as she navigated the aisles of leafy greens, her mind racing, her cheeks still flushed from the chaotic encounter in her lab. The scent of damp soil and blooming herbs usually had a soothing effect on her, but today, it was being drowned out by the lingering, insistent undercurrent of Kael'Zar's pheromones. Okay, focus, Evie, focus, she muttered, picking a wilting basil leaf and examining it with unnecessary scrutiny. This is just biology. Just alien biology. Not anything else. She rolled the leaf between her fingers as if it could magically reveal the secrets of xylosian attraction. Kael'Zar followed her into the bay, his bioluminescence now a constant, pulsating display of shifting colors. He seemed to be in a state of heightened activity, his tentacles moving with a restless energy that made Evie's carefully constructed sense of order feel as fragile as a dried petal. She watched him warily, trying to maintain a safe distance, but her eyes kept drifting back to him, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't comprehend. These specimens of rhododendron are intriguing, Kael'Zar said, extending a tentacle towards a cluster of vibrant pink flowers. Their petals exhibit a remarkable degree of symmetry. Yeah, they're pretty, Evie said, her voice slightly breathy. We humans like symmetry. Well, some of us do. I, personally, am more of a fan of controlled chaos. She shot a quick glance at Kael'Zar. It's less predictable. Kael'Zar seemed to pick up on the shift in her tone. He turned towards her, his three eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. His bioluminescence intensified, the patterns becoming more complex, almost mesmerizing. Evie felt her own pheromonal output respond, a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through her. She tried to focus on her work, but her body felt like it had a life of its own. She could feel the pulse of blood through her veins, and her limbs tingled with nervous energy. I am observing a significant change in your physiological state, Dr. Reed, Kael'Zar said, his translator voice almost a purr. Your pheromonal output is heightened. I believe it is time for our cultural exchange to shift towards physical expression. Evie blinked. Physical expression, she repeated, her voice slightly strained. What do you mean by physical expression? One of Kael'Zar's tentacles began to move in a slow, graceful arc, tracing a pattern in the air that seemed both intricate and strangely compelling. Among the xylosians, physical expression is a key element of our communication and courtship, he said, his bioluminescence shifting from a calm, almost soothing blue to an intense, pulsating red. It is customary for individuals of compatible pheromonal profiles to engage in a form of dance. Dance? Evie repeated, a sense of disbelief washing over her. You mean like, with music and feet? Kael'Zar tilted his head, his bioluminescence flaring. While sonic vibrations can enhance the experience, the primary focus is on the movements themselves. The dance is a complex interaction of physical forms, each gesture designed to convey meaning and desire. He then extended his tentacles, moving in a fluid motion that somehow spoke to something deep inside of her. Oh, Evie managed, her brain trying to catch up with the rapidly unfolding situation. She couldn't help but find the tentacle movements graceful, but they were also, alarmingly, seductive. And that was not where she wanted to go. I believe it is time for us to begin, Kael'Zar stated, with the confidence of an alien who was utterly unaware that he was in the middle of what could potentially be described as an interspecies mating ritual. Wait, wait, wait. Evie held up a hand. I don't think I'm really dressed for dancing. Or, you know, Xylosian dancing. I'm just in my standard lab attire. Kael'Zar seemed unfazed. There are no specific attire requirements, he said. The dance is about the expression of the self. Your clothing is functional. It will not impede the ritual. Evie knew a losing battle when she saw one. Especially one that involved a six-tentacled, bioluminescent alien in the throes of, apparently, a courtship dance. Okay, she said, taking a deep breath and trying to muster a sense of composure she didn't quite feel. So, what, you just move around? Kael'Zar's translator let out a sound that might have been a chuckle. It is far more complex than that, Dr. Reed. The dance is an art form, a dialogue between bodies. It is a language that transcends the limitations of verbal communication. He then began to move, his tentacles flowing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. His bioluminescence shifted with every move, painting the air with intricate patterns of light. It was, Evie had to admit, mesmerizing. She could feel her own body responding, her limbs wanting to move in time with his, her heart pounding with a combination of fascination and pure, unadulterated panic. Okay, I see, kind of, she said, taking a step back to give herself room. So, I just mirror your movements. Kael'Zar nodded, and Evie took a deep breath and attempted to copy his graceful, fluid motion. She quickly found that translating tentacle movements to a human form was a lot harder than it looked. Her arms flailed, her legs tangled, and she nearly tripped over a low-lying fern. It was less of a dance and more of a clumsy, human-shaped attempt to recreate a complex, alien ballet. I think I might need some practice, Evie said, laughing, trying to hide her embarrassment. Maybe we should start with something a little less coordinated. But as she spoke, Kael'Zar's bioluminescence intensified, his movements becoming more forceful, more insistent. He began to move closer, his tentacles tracing patterns around her, drawing her into the dance, or rather, whatever the Xylosian equivalent was to an impromptu mating ritual. Evie tried to take another step back, but one of his tentacles gently brushed against her arm, sending a shiver of awareness through her. The pheromones intensified, making it harder to think, harder to resist the growing urge to follow his lead. Kael'Zar, she said, her voice a strained whisper. I don't think I can, do this. Not really. But Kael'Zar didn't seem to hear her. His focus was now solely on her, his movements becoming increasingly intimate. He began to sway, his tentacles tracing patterns on her back, her arms, her waist, twitching with barely contained fury. Dr. Reed, he said, his translator voice dripping with hostility. You have defied our demands. You have corrupted our scholar. Your actions will not go unpunished. Oh, I don't know, Evie retorted, stepping forward. I think we've been pretty good at the whole punishment thing. I mean, have you seen my apartment? It's a mess of discarded tea bags and crochet yarn. That's pretty severe if you ask me. The Xylosian leader's bioluminescence flared, his tentacles tightening. Your attempts at humor are irrelevant. We have given you a chance to surrender peacefully. You will hand over Kael'Zar, and you will be punished for your interference. Kael'Zar stepped forward, placing himself between Evie and the angry Xylosian. I will not be handed over, he said, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. I have made my choice. I will continue my research, and I will not be controlled by your fear. Your so-called research has corrupted you, the leader spat. You have fallen under the sway of this human female's pheromonal manipulation. Evie snorted. Pheromonal manipulation? Oh, come on, even I'm getting tired of that line. I'm a scientist, not some sort of alien seductress with a PhD. Besides, if I was manipulating you with my pheromones, I'd probably choose a better method of transportation than a research colony. I mean, really, this place has no decent coffee. The Xylosian leader paused, his bioluminescence flickering with a mix of anger and confusion. "Your attempts at distraction will not work," he said. "We will take Kael'Zar by force if necessary." Evie took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing. "Okay, here's the thing," she said, her voice steady. "We've been doing a lot of research here, and we've discovered something very important. Something that seems to be missing from your worldview." "And what might that be?" the Xylosian leader asked, his translator voice dripping with skepticism. "It's called understanding," Evie said, her gaze unwavering. "It's the ability to see past your differences, to connect with someone, even if they don't share your same biology or your same cultural background. It's about embracing the chaos, instead of being afraid of it. And yes, it also involves tentacles and the occasional mating dance, but that's all part of the experience, you know?" The Xylosian leader stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and disdain. "Your words are meaningless. You cannot possibly comprehend the complexities of our culture." "Maybe not," Evie said with a shrug. "But I can comprehend that you are being a complete idiot. I can also comprehend the power of connection, and how that can bring more people together than your weirdly aggressive approach to diplomacy. Besides, have you ever tried Earth tea? It's actually pretty good." She could see the frustration building in the Xylosian leader, his tentacles twitching more rapidly. "I have heard enough," he said, his voice rising. "Prepare to be subdued." Evie looked at Kael'Zar, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. She knew that this was it, that they had to do something, and quickly. She took a deep breath and decided to let go of the plan. "Okay, Kael'Zar," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Time for our final research project. I call it the Phenomenal Harmonic Convergence." Kael'Zar's bioluminescence flared, a brilliant blue that illuminated the entire plaza. "I am intrigued. Please elaborate. Remember all the stuff you said about our pheromones, and about how they create a resonance? And how you said our bioluminescence can affect the physiological state of others?" Evie asked. "I do," Kael'Zar responded, his voice resonating with an almost electric energy. "Well," Evie said, with a grin that bordered on manic, "let's see what happens when we turn that resonance up to 11. And with that, Evie did something completely unexpected. She took a deep breath, channeled all her pent-up energy, and released a wave of pheromones unlike anything she had ever experienced before. It was a blend of fear, defiance, affection, and a surprising amount of, well, lust. It was the culmination of everything she had felt during her time with Kael'Zar, a complex mix of human emotions that surged outwards like a tidal wave. And it worked. Kael'Zar responded in kind, his bioluminescence intensifying, his tentacles moving with a speed and grace that was almost hypnotic. He released his own pheromones, a complex blend of scientific precision and raw, untamed desire. The two sets of pheromones collided, creating a chaotic, yet strangely harmonious, energy field that enveloped the entire plaza. The Xylosian soldiers, caught in the crossfire, stumbled, their bioluminescence flickering erratically. Some clutched their heads in confusion, others swayed unsteadily on their feet, and a few simply collapsed onto the ground, their expressions a mix of bewilderment and dawning realization. The Xylosian leader stared at them, his bioluminescence a confused mess. What is happening?" he stammered, his voice trembling. "That, my friend," Evie said with a triumphant grin, "is the power of interspecies understanding. And a whole lot of pheromones." Kael'Zar moved closer to her, his tentacles gently brushing against her skin. "Our unique biology has allowed us to bridge the gap between species," he said. "Our connection is beyond mere physical attraction." Evie looked at him, her heart full of an emotion she couldn't quite articulate. It was more than just scientific curiosity, more than just physical desire. It was love, in its purest, most untamed form. And it was something that could bring two worlds together. The Xylosian leader, finally realizing the futility of his aggression, lowered his tentacles, his bioluminescence dimming to a soft, almost apologetic shade of blue. "I do not understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I will admit, your methods are effective. Evie chuckled. Yeah, well, we humans are nothing if not inventive. And a little bit crazy. But also, as it turns out, incredibly good at interspecies pheromonal warfare. So, maybe next time, you should just ask us nicely for a cup of tea, instead of threatening to invade our colony. It's honestly a much more effective strategy. With a sigh of relief, Evie knew they had won. The xenophobic threat was over, for now at least. The alien Tango had taken its most dangerous twirl, and somehow, she and Kael'Zar had managed to not only survive, but also to forge a connection that was stronger than any cultural difference, any biological barrier, any threat of alien invasion. The journey had been chaotic, unpredictable, and at times, utterly absurd, but she wouldn't have had it any other way. And she had a feeling that their unique, interspecies love story was only just getting started. The aftermath of this pheromonal harmonic convergence, as Evie had jokingly dubbed it, was surprisingly peaceful. The Xylosian soldiers, their minds now slightly less inclined towards interspecies aggression, had retreated to their ships, leaving the colony in a state of stunned relief. The xenophobic leader, his pride slightly bruised but his perspective subtly altered, had agreed to a formal summit with the colony's representatives, promising to approach future interactions with a more open mind and a healthy dose of caution. Evie, however, found herself less concerned with the diplomatic fallout and more focused on the task at hand, figuring out how to navigate her new, incredibly complex, and increasingly intimate relationship with a six-tentacled, bioluminescent alien. She and Kael'Zar were now more than just research partners, they were something else, something undefined, something that existed beyond the boundaries of cultural norms and biological expectations. And while she found the whole situation undeniably thrilling, she was also starting to realize just how many practical challenges they would have to overcome. Okay, so, let's talk logistics, Evie said, sitting on the edge of her sofa, a notepad in her lap and a half-eaten protein bar in her hand. Kael'Zar, now comfortably ensconced in his beanbag chair, observed her with an unnerving intensity that was quickly becoming her new normal. His bioluminescence pulsed with a soft, almost thoughtful blue. Logistics, he repeated, his translator voice laced with a hint of curiosity. Yeah, you know, like, how do we actually make this, Gus, work? I mean, you're a semi-aquatic, bioluminescent, pheromone-emitting alien, and I'm, well, me. We have very different needs, very different cultures, and very different ideas about what constitutes a good time. Kael'Zar's bioluminescence shifted, a complex pattern that Evie was beginning to recognize as a sign of deep contemplation. I have been considering this matter as well, he said. It is clear that our biological requirements are not entirely compatible. Your need for a dry, oxygen-rich atmosphere, while my preference is for a humid, semi-aquatic environment, poses a significant challenge. Not to mention the whole mating ritual thing, Evie added, wincing. I'm still not entirely sure I understand what constitutes a successful Xylosian mating dance. Or how to avoid accidentally releasing pheromones that send you into a bioluminescent frenzy. Not that I mind a bioluminescent frenzy, you know, for research, of course. She mentally face-palmed. She really needed to get a handle on her inner monologue. Kael'Zar moved closer, his tentacles tracing patterns in the air around her. Your pheromonal output is particularly compelling, he said, his translator voice a low, almost seductive rumble. I believe that, together, we can navigate the intricacies of our biological compatibility. Evie swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way her heart was hammering in her chest. Okay, so, that's one challenge, she said, scribbling notes in her pad. What about communication? I mean, I'm not exactly fluent in Xylosian, and you're still getting used to the quirks of human language. We're gonna need some sort of common ground. Kael'Zar extended a tentacle, gently touching her cheek. I have been developing a new communication method, one that integrates both our species' unique forms of expression. It combines human vocalizations, Xylosian tentacle gestures, and a complex system of bioluminescent signaling. Evie blinked, intrigued. Wait, you've been working on a hybrid language? For us? Oh my god, Kael'Zar, you're such a geek. Kael'Zar's bioluminescence pulsed, a soft, almost pleased blue. I have also been working on a detailed study of human music and literature, he continued. I believe that your culture's complex and often illogical forms of expression will greatly enhance my understanding of the human condition. Evie laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound that echoed in the small apartment. Oh, you're going to love the rom-coms, she said. And the pop music. And the terrible poetry. We humans are nothing if not deeply flawed. But we also have a lot of passion. Passion, Kael'Zar repeated, his translator voice taking on a new, almost reverent tone. I find the human capacity for passionate expression to be remarkably compelling. Evie could feel her cheeks heating up again. Yeah, well, it's not all bad, is it? Even if it does involve a lot of awkwardness and questionable decisions. They spent the next few days developing their new communication method, a strange, yet surprisingly effective mix of human and Xylosian elements. They would practice new gestures, develop new bioluminescent signals, and even attempt to sing in each other's languages, leading to a series of hilarious, often out of tune, vocal exercises that left both of them breathless with laughter. They also began to share their cultures more openly, Evie explaining the nuances of Earth's traditions, the beauty of its landscapes, and the joys of messy, spontaneous human interactions. Kael'Zar, in turn, shared the intricacies of Xylosian art, science, and philosophy, opening Evie's mind to a world of knowledge she had never imagined possible. As they grew closer, their physical intimacy deepened, transcending the boundaries of scientific research and becoming something more profound, more meaningful. They would explore each other's bodies, learning the unique rhythms and sensitivities that made them who they were. They found a way to communicate their desires, not just through words, but through the subtle shifts of bioluminescence, the gentle sway of tentacles, and the shared breaths that mingled in the air between them. They were learning, slowly and surely, how to navigate their differences, how to create a space where both their unique needs and desires could coexist. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of awkwardness, misunderstandings, and the occasional pheromonal overload, but they were learning to embrace the chaos, to laugh at their mistakes, and to cherish the unique connection that they had forged. And then, one evening, as they were sitting on the floor of Evie's apartment, surrounded by notebooks and half-empty tea cups, Kael'Zar looked at Evie, his bioluminescence a soft, gentle blue, and said something that made her heart skip a beat. Dr. Reed, he said, his translator voice carrying a note of tenderness. I believe that our connection transcends the limitations of mere scientific research. My feelings for you are beyond the realm of logical explanation. Evie stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and joy. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Kael'Zar extended a tentacle, gently touching her cheek. I am saying that my experience with you has opened my mind and changed my perspective. I have grown to admire your courage, your compassion, and your unique ability to embrace the messy, illogical chaos of the human experience. I am saying that my affections for you are significant. Evie smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Oh, Kael'Zar, she whispered, leaning closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch his tentacle. I think I might feel the same way about you, you big, tentacled, bioluminescent geek. The two of them embraced, their bodies finally finding a comfortable rhythm, a shared space where their differences faded into the background, and only their connection remained, a bright, shining light that illuminated their unique path forward. The journey had been chaotic, unpredictable, and at times, utterly absurd, but they had finally reached a place of understanding, a place where they could be themselves, together, without reservation. And they knew, with a deep sense of certainty, that their interspecies love story was only just beginning. 6 months had passed since the xenophobic Xylosians' failed invasion, and the Xylos research colony had undergone a remarkable transformation. The initial fear and distrust had gradually given way to a newfound sense of curiosity and acceptance. The colony, once a quiet outpost of scientific inquiry, was now a vibrant hub of interspecies exchange, a place where humans and Xylosians coexisted, collaborated, and occasionally engaged in slightly awkward cultural misunderstandings that were, more often than not, hilarious. Evie, now sporting a slightly more organized lab, though still liberally scattered with half-finished projects and tea-stained notebooks, surveyed the scene with a satisfied smile. The colony forum was now filled with discussions about cross-species cooking recipes, collaborative art projects, and even a few surprisingly well-written Xylosian sonnets. It was a far cry from the tense, fear-filled atmosphere of the past, and Evie couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the role she had played in fostering this change. She was, however, slightly less organized in her personal life. Her apartment, though slightly less cluttered, was now also home to a range of Xylosian artifacts, a climate-controlled terrarium that housed Kael'zar's favorite Xylosian plants, and a collection of bioluminescent lamps that pulsed with a soft, otherworldly glow. It was a strange, but strangely harmonious, blend of human and alien, a testament to the unique connection she had forged with Kael'zar. Kael'zar, who had been working on a holographic display in the corner of the lab, approached her, his bioluminescence pulsing with a soft, almost affectionate rhythm. "Your observations of the cross-cultural impact of interspecies interaction are quite insightful, Dr. Reed," he said, his translator voice carrying a note of playful amusement. "However, I must point out that the data presented in your latest report lacks sufficient analysis of the phenomenal variables. Your conclusions, while not entirely inaccurate, could benefit from further investigation. Perhaps, a more hands-on approach." Evie rolled her eyes, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Oh, here we go again with that hands-on approach," she said, her voice laced with mock exasperation. "Can't a girl just write a report without you trying to turn it into an excuse for a phenomenal research session?" Kael'zar moved closer, his tentacles tracing patterns in the air around her. "Our exploration of interspecies communication is a continuous process, Dr. Reed. I believe that a comprehensive analysis requires a holistic approach." "Oh, so you're saying that I need to get more involved with you to get it right, is that it?" Evie asked, leaning against the lab table, her eye sparkling with mischief. "You're just using science as an excuse for a little tentacled tango, aren't you?" Kael'zar's bioluminescence flared, a complex pattern of blues and greens that seemed to dance in the air. The term a tentacled tango is a somewhat simplistic description of a complex exchange of physiological and emotional signals, he said, his voice a low, almost purring rumble. "However, I will not deny that the experience is highly stimulating." Evie chuckled, shaking her head. "You're a lot more charming when you're not trying to seduce me with science," she said, walking to the coffee maker. "Seduction? Is that a human term that means the strategic application of logic and biological data to attain a desired outcome?" Kael'zar asked, his head tilting with obvious confusion. "No, it's never mind," Evie said, laughing as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "You're hopeless." "I prefer to think of myself as analytically focused," Kael'zar said, moving closer, his tentacles gently brushing her arm. "And my focus is, as always, on you." Their relationship had settled into a comfortable rhythm, a strange blend of scientific collaboration, intellectual sparring, and increasingly intimate encounters that defied all the rules of interspecies interaction. They had developed their unique hybrid language, a combination of human and Xylosian elements that allowed them to communicate on a level that was both profound and playfully absurd. They would spend hours in the lab, poring over scientific data, discussing philosophical concepts, and developing new theories that pushed the boundaries of human and Xylosian knowledge. They would then spend hours in Evie's apartment, experimenting with new recipes, listening to Earth music, and, of course, engaging in their increasingly elaborate research sessions, their bodies entwined in a complex dance of bioluminescence and touch. They still had their challenges, of course. There were still moments of awkward misunderstandings, instances where their different biological requirements clashed, and times when they both had to take a deep breath and remind themselves that they were from different worlds. But they had also learned how to navigate these challenges with humor, patience, and a deep sense of affection for each other. They had also become minor celebrities within the colony. Their unique relationship had become a source of inspiration for others, a testament to the power of connection and understanding. They had started giving regular workshops on cross-cultural communication, teaching others how to embrace their differences and find common ground. And, to Evie's great amusement, They had even started a new trend of interspecies fusion cooking, leading to a range of interesting culinary experiments that were not always successful. One afternoon, as they were walking through the colony's central plaza, hand in tentacle, they were approached by a group of Xylosian and human children, their eyes wide with curiosity. The children, a mixture of both species, asked them a barrage of questions about their relationship, their communication methods, and their unique approach to life. "Is it hard to live with someone who has tentacles?" one of the human children asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Well, it can be a bit tricky sometimes, especially when I'm trying to find my keys," Evie said, with a wink, "but mostly, it's pretty awesome." "Do you ever get tired of the glow?" one of the Xylosian children asked, her bioluminescence pulsing with a curious light. "Never," Kael'Zar responded, his voice carrying a note of affection. "It's like having my own personal aurora borealis. And it changes with her emotions. It is scientifically fascinating." "Oh, so now it's science?" Evie asked, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "It is always science, Dr. Reed," Kael'Zar said, with a completely straight face, "but it is also a profound joy." "Mostly." Evie laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound that echoed through the plaza. She looked at Kael'Zar, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, and she knew that she had found her place, her home, with this strange, wonderful alien who had turned her life into a chaotic, and ultimately beautiful, interspecies tango. As they walked away, Evie couldn't help but smile. The challenges would always be there, the differences would always remain, but the love, the understanding, and the connection they had forged would continue to grow, a testament to the power of embracing the unexpected, of finding joy in the chaos, and of dancing, even if it involved a few awkward steps and the occasional misplaced tentacle. Their interspecies love story was far from over. It was, in fact, just the beginning. And Evie, for the first time in her life, was ready to dance on, wherever the path may lead her, as long as she had Kael'Zar by her side, his bioluminescence shining brightly in the darkness, and his tentacles ready to embrace her, always and forever. The Terran Tango, it seemed, was destined to continue.